And welcome to episode Who Knows of Toward the Games, Brisbane 2032. I'm Lutzy, joined by the editor of the Courier Mail, Chris Jones, as always. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Lutzy. How
you,
excited are you? We're not far off 10 years now until the curtain comes up on the Brisbane 2032 Olympic Games.
What's that equate to in days? Don't pretend you don't know.
I reckon we're probably around 3,800 days to go.
We've got to make sure when we hit these milestones that we acknowledge them, all right? 38. We're about
3,800 days to go. Its clock is ticking.
Clock is ticking very quickly. And a special guest with us. Let's get it straight off the bat.
That would explain your shirt, the Team Quirk T-shirt that you've got on there. Would explain
limited edition.
Who is sitting next to you today.
It's usually framed at home, but I cracked the glass. I cracked the glass to get it out for this. There's some glass still in it. It's a little uncomfortable around the shoulders.
It's slightly small, but I assume that was...
Yes, but former Lord Mayor,
years ago.
Former Lord Mayor of Brisbane, Mr. Graham Quirk, joining us for this episode.
Yes.
Bravo.
Welcome, Graham Quirk.
How are you,
Thank you very much. Good day, Lutzy. Good day, Chris.
Welcome, mate. We've wanted to get you on almost from the outset because of the role that was being played by, apparently a lot of people who have claimed the initial movement to get the games to southeast Queensland. But today we will reveal the role that you played, and a significant one it was that Jonesy has told me about during the week. So we're really keen to delve into that today.
Well, I think what's interesting is we joke about it still being 10 years until the games are on, but I think there's a bit of a misconception that the Olympic Games bid sort of came about directly after the Commonwealth Games. Yeah. It was sort of a whatever that would be, a 3-year run-in.
Yep.
But actually this goes a lot further back, and that's why I thought getting Quirky on today to give us the history lesson would be relevant to the podcast with only... As we start this countdown with only 3,800 days to go. Okay, we'll get into that. I think from the outset, gentlemen, we need to, as we always do when there is breaking committee chat news, address some people that have been added to the organising committee. And Chris, I got a desperate phone call from him during the week saying it's about to happen. They've named the, what did we call them? The Queensland Quad. The Queensland Quad. Still working. I'm not sure if that works.
It's not perfect, but we'll work on that.
There is alliteration, but it's slightly failed alliteration.
But nonetheless, we know who they are.
We do
now. So talk us through the names. I'm interested to get.
Unsurprisingly, Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk has again declared the winner is me and put herself onto the BOCOG. And so Anastasia Palaszczuk will be there. She's bringing with her. She was allowed, as we've said a few times, she was allowed to bring appoint 4 people. So one of whom will be her. This was a surprise. Yes, Deputy Premier Stephen Miles. Now everyone had assumed that it would be the minister assisting the Olympics minister and premier on the Olympics Paralympics Games. Get that on business card, Sterling Hinchcliffe, who is also the minister for sport and other fun things. But he has missed out on a seat on the BOCOG, and it's going to be Stephen Miles, Deputy Premier. Now, I know the committee chat is usually very exciting, Lutzy. I don't want to get too in the weeds on this, okay? But I would be I think this might be a Labor factional thing. Stephen Miles is from the left.
One's left, one's right.
And yes, so Anastasia Palaszczuk is from the right.
Yep.
Sterling Hinchcliffe's also from the right. So I would suggest this is why we've seen that. Sterling Hinchcliffe is going to head up the, in inverted commas, very powerful, the press release said, legacy committee. For the Olympics.
I spoke to him about that last night at the flood relief for Queensland.
Is he excited?
He's excited about the legacy committee and being
is he better? He had COVID
of that. Well, I hope he was, because I was right in front of his face, so I wasn't that close to him. But so we've got those two. Then of course,
and 2 athletes. Do you want to run through them?
Patrick Johnson, first Australian, I believe, to run under 10 seconds. He ran 9. What did he end up running? 9.98 or 9.92, something like that anyway. But
he still holds the Australian and Oceania record for 100 metres.
Yes, he would too. Yeah, and of course then Natalie Cook, who was the 2000 gold medalist. So we've got Cook, Johnson, Miles, and Palaszczuk. Graham Quirk, your thoughts on those 4 in the state 4, if you like, in the on the BOCOG board?
Well, I mean, you've got two athletes. Whether you needed two pollies is probably a question for debate. Whether you need any, in fact, is really a question for debate in a sense.
Yeah.
I think, though, obviously, of those four, Natalie Cook brings the energy, the enthusiasm, the absolute experience, not only of being an athlete, but she's been so intricately involved in the Olympic movement over that time since she was a gold medalist. And she'll just bring a wealth of experience to the table.
Okay, so your point there is that politicians, are they overriding these committees?
Oh, look, I haven't been involved in the last 2 years. When I left public life, and I've tended not to engage in debate around what they do. I mean, they'll have their reasons for it. I guess they want to maintain some control. It also gives additional profile from a practical political point of view. They're things why you'd put yourself on there, I guess. But from an Olympic body point of view, my main concern is that things move. Things have got to move. You're talking about numbers of days. They will go in a flash.
Yep.
And one of the great issues, I think, is making sure that decisions are made early, timelines are put in place. We all know there is labour shortages in this country in terms of building things, and it's not going to be able to be built in the last few years. There's got to be a pipeline put in place, and that's going to mean quick, early decisions and get on with it.
Okay.
That's my bit. I'm leaving it at that.
Well,
Fair play.
the Premier says she has to be on it because she says someone has to be responsible for doing what I signed up to, which is kind of ironic considering that they've already gone back to the IOC to ask for an extension in terms of establishing
the first
the
meeting.
BOCOG. They've already missed the first deadline. But anyway, it's good. Like I think having Stephen Miles on there, isn't a bad thing. If you can have the Premier and the Deputy Premier on that committee, that makes a lot of sense. I still have this concern, Lutzi, about the governance. We're sitting around that table of 22, ostensibly led by the chair,
Who calls the
TBA,
shots?
who will hopefully be announced in the next week or two, will be John Coates, Godfather Olympic movement in Australia, the Premier and now Deputy Premier, the Brisbane Lord Mayor.
So who calls the shots?
Who calls the shots?
Who does call the shots? I mean,
How's that gonna
you're
play?
savvy to that sort of hierarchy, Graham. I mean, in that, and you've worked on in many boards and that sort of situation. In that circumstance, when you've got a lot of heavy hitters like that, can someone take hold and be the chairperson, or are you going to have all these conflicting sort of egos working at it?
Well, you need someone to do that, and it has to be somebody who is a quick decision maker, somebody who understands what needs to be done from an Olympic delivery point of view, and somebody who's just able to pull heads together and drive it. Now, they're not in abundance out there, but we need to find somebody who will do that and is capable of working with all sides of politics, because the reality is in the next 10 years, there's going to be changes of government all over the place. That's the nature of things, changes of leaders, if not changes of the colour of governments. Yeah. And so you need a person that can, as I say, pull heads together, make forced decisions from a big committee. As you correctly point out, the bigger the committee, often the slower decision making can be. So you need a real driver at the helm.
I'm still, Chris tries to explain it to me. I'm still, and I'm not sure if anyone has an actual answer to what happens exactly to different members of the committee when governments change, who stays, who goes, specifically
Essentially,
in relation
the politicians come off.
Will they, is my question. Like, say for whatever reason, Liberals win the next state election, like, would Anastasia go?
Well, probably the earlier one would be if Labor wins the federal election, and then you've got Richard Colbeck and the school
Ted
and
O'Brien.
the MP Fairfax.
Nudgee College school captain, 1991.
1991, was it?
I think it was. Yeah. Ted O'Brien.
They'd come off at they'd come off, and then
on
you'd
that
have
level,
two
I
Labor
get it.
appointments.
But I just feel like Coates and the Premier are on a different level with how they're sort of galvanising themselves.
I can't imagine
into this.
citizen Anastasia Palaszczuk
Okay, that's it.
retaining her spot on the BOCOG should she not be Premier.
And on that note, Graham, I was just flicking through some old sort of newspaper clippings from the Chris Jones Courier Mail from a year ago, where one Graham Quirk was being feted as the potential chairman of the BOCOG board, and presumably you had aspirations around that. Is that something which has come and gone?
Oh, no, well, I've never had aspirations
Right,
around
that was
In
just
fact,
print.
Yeah. No, I ruled there was speculation, but I ruled myself out very early in the piece around that.
Why is that?
Well, it's family reasons. I've got a daughter with severe disabilities,
Right, okay.
and my responsibility as retired from public life now is to put her first.
Right, okay, so that's so. Have you got any? It seems like given the impact you did have, which we're about to discuss, that you should play some kind of role down the track. Surely you've got some passion somewhere, if the time allowed you with your family and everything, to have a positive influence on the 2032 games.
Look, I'm always here to give some input if that's required. But look, in terms of a formal role, I don't think it's fair for me in my current situation to do that, to be honest. And, I've always been a person, if I can't give 100%, I just won't engage with it. And that's just the way I am.
Okay. Let's move forward to that now.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, your car keys.
Oh, sorry, Susan O'Neill's just come in. Madam Butterfly has come into the podcast.
Hi, Susie, really well.
She's great. Quick, please, keep rolling. This is fantastic stuff. This will raise the numbers. Here's my car keys. I'm giving my car keys to Susan O'Neill. Do you know how to drive it?
No.
Oh, be careful.
It's raising more questions than it's answering, of course.
That's right. Only one person can storm into the storm. Where's her part in it? That's the other person.
You can only interrupt this podcast if you won 2 Olympic gold medals.
That's it. All right. So where we're heading after that? We're going to talk about.
Lucky it's a loaner, that car.
Yeah, it's not even mine. So yeah, she can do what she wants to it, really. But
well, I think let's go back in time then.
Yeah,
let's
let's
go back
take us back.
to I reckon it would have been about 2015, Graham, when there was a little twinkle in your eye and you thought, I know, I've got an idea.
Well, Chris, it sort of was after 2014. You might recall we had the G20 World Leaders Summit in Brisbane, and the mayors were saying, well, what do we do now? What's the next thing that we can do to put ourselves in the world spotlight? To be honest, the G20 wasn't as big as people might think. In fact, the reach of the Manny Pacquiao-Jeff Horn fight was bigger than the
right?
G20 World Leaders Summit.
Well, I must admit, I sat in a pub in West Hollywood and pointing at the screen in front of a bunch of Americans, saying, "That's where I live. How cool is that? That's Brisbane." They're going, "You serious? That big stadium?" And
Yeah.
It was a proud moment. So I get that. Yeah.
It was, and as I say, the reach for sport is enormous, and that's the key here with an Olympics, the biggest show on earth. But we were talking about, well, what are the sort of things that we could do to put ourselves further on the map, to develop the infrastructure that we needed, because as mayors we were really concerned. We could see all this population growth coming at us and really no plan to put the infrastructure in place that we needed. And what also would attract some investment to the region. So we were tossing up ideas, and at the same time we had this call from a journalist by the name of Wayne Smith. And he put it to me, would Brisbane be interested in bidding for an Olympic Games? And I said to him, no, we wouldn't. But as a region, we probably would. And we'd look at a Brisbane region bid. So therein lied the trick. So we had a discussion on the 6th of March 2015 as a group of mayors, and we resolved unanimously to look at furthering the opportunity for an Olympic bid. And at that point, we then wrote to the Prime Minister, who was Tony Abbott at the time, Anastasia Palaszczuk as Premier, and we wrote to John Coates. And the letter we got back from John Coates was, to support it, but more importantly, what he did was he put us, or established for us, a telephone hookup meeting with Thomas Bach, the international president, within a month. Right. Now that could have been a real showstopper.
Okay, so that you needed the IOC on board, at least acknowledging the fact that you were interested at that point.
Well, there was that, but there was also this other conversation that needed to be had, because as a group of mayors, we said we're not prepared to do this at any cost. There's going to have to be some conditions, and we could have been dead meat in that first half-hour phone conversation. He was actually in Sydney. Mayor Mark Jamieson from the Sunshine Coast went to Sydney. I couldn't go for family reasons at the time, but I was on the telephone and led the discussion on the phone, there were three things we put to him. The first thing was, I said, Mr. President, this is unusual. Usually cities do the bids. We want to do it as a region.
Yep.
And he was just silent, and I could sense that there was a bit of uneasiness about this. But then we set about explaining, well, how this would work and the travel times that would be involved and how we could make it happen as a region. When we wanted to do this because we wanted to get the collective benefit of it as well. And so the second thing then, he said, well, leave that with me. The second thing was we're really concerned about bid costs. 60 million for a bid cost. And then often you'd have to bid a second time before you'd get it. Yeah. So we thought, well, that's a bit much. And the third thing was, and this was the big one for us, was building white elephants. And I said, I did as respectfully as I could, but I said there are a litany of white elephants around the world where Olympic Games facilities have been built and never used again.
Google it
and
on
we
YouTube.
Absolutely.
There's like literally tens and tens of them that are just like old, washed up, derelict buildings now, almost suburbs.
Exactly, Lutzy. And, they were almost from every Olympic Games. You had these leftover facilities. And so, I said to him, I just sense, Mr. President, that, it's going to get harder to get cities to put their hands up because of the public reaction to white elephants being left behind from Olympic Games and Paralympic Games. And so, anyway, as I say, we could have been out.
They're three brave things to put to the president of the IOC at that point. It's turned out to be that's the way it now operates.
The new normal.
If you rewind to that point, it was still. Yeah. It's a very bold meeting. Was that intentional to just go in there and just lead with your chin?
Yes, it was, because it came down to the point that we were not prepared to do this at any cost. There had to be a demonstrative advantage to southeast Queensland and to the nation through all the things that it would bring for us to do this. And so it wasn't an at all cost situation.
You could almost put an argument forth that that was a turning point of sorts for the IOC and the new normal that they have now established, which is acknowledging that in today's society we can't rely on country or cities coming together en masse, throwing millions and millions and millions of dollars to just get to the point of bidding for an Olympic city. And now that has become what was the first Olympics that followed that model? Would that have been, is Paris under that sort of, the minimal spend, no existing infrastructure kind of thing? Are they running on that model, or did they put millions and millions into a bid?
When did Paris? It would have been 7 years prior. So
Well, you'll see part of the benefit in Paris. Yeah. You'll see more of it in LA. And you'll see it absolutely when it comes to Brisbane. And I think, to their credit, the Olympic movement at the time when I was having this conversation, and it was kind of a he who dares wins conversation, I suppose. Yeah. But the Olympic movement themselves was starting to twig to this. We're in real trouble here unless we reform. And they'd started a reform process but hadn't talked about it. Yeah. And so it was kind of like stars aligning. I was having this conversation and they, without saying anything publicly, were already starting to go on this journey. And the real telling point for us, you see, we'd started to go for 2028.
Yeah.
That was our original plan for Olympic and Paralympic Games. And when they announced Paris 24, Los Angeles 28 in the one mouthful, that was a real signal to us that these people are serious about reform, and that was music to our ears. So it would put us back 4 years, but I think that's been a good thing in terms of the time we need to get it right.
Okay, we'll take a quick break. Come back with more with former Lord Mayor of Brisbane, Graham Quirk, as always, the Jones man from the Courier Mail. Back in a moment. Hey guys, towards the Games, Brisbane 2032 with former Lord Mayor of Brisbane, Graham Quirk, and editor of the Courier Mail, Chris Jones. I'm Lutzy.
What was the moment like when you said to the president of the IOC, hey, we want to do this on the cheap?
Well, he was listening. And that was a sense of things. There was a non-committal response.
Yes.
But I could hear him, almost thinking,
Yeah.
and so I left that sort of conversation with hope in my heart and a sense of, well, maybe something can be done here.
And was John Coates involved at this early stage?
No.
Because so John was the one as the vice president of the IOC who then built out the new norms, and it almost seemed like what he was building out was purpose fit for a bid for Southeast Queensland. But this was prior to, you hadn't even spoken to John. You hadn't.
Well, John had been instrumental in setting up the meeting with Thomas Bach.
Yeah, but he hadn't advised on the.
No, not at that stage, but I don't think anyone should be in any doubt at all the absolute influence that John Coates had in the Brisbane region,
Yes.
Southeast Queensland, getting these games.
Yes.
He headed up the whole reform process. They voted to allow regions to bid rather than just cities. And I think the power and influence that he has in the international Olympic movement should never, ever be underestimated.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's it felt appropriate, didn't it, when we had him on to just thank him for what he'd done.
Yeah,
It was,
absolutely.
I can't believe you actually swung this. It's
Yeah.
incredible. So I assume after that meeting and things roll on, I often say to Lutzi, the only thing more exciting, Lutzi, than a feasibility study is a pre-feasibility study. and I imagine
Sexy words. Sexy
I imagine we
words.
rolled into a pre-feasibility study, did we? Post the meeting.
We did. We had to have a pre-feasibility. You've got to give bureaucracy something to do. But that was a telling point, because as soon as you mention studies, you're talking money.
Yeah.
So it's easy for everyone to put up their hand and say, yeah, let's go for an Olympics. That was the easy bit on the 6th of March. Then I had to go and ask mayors. And mayors in some, remote localities. I'm not talking about remote, I'm talking about rural areas like Somerset and Lockyer Valley and the Toowoomba's and so forth. And not every council contributed initially. Eventually we got everybody except the Gold Coast. That's another story, which we should leave alone today, or it will fume me up. But
I don't think we'll be leaving it alone.
but to their great credit, I think this was a thing that will always stay in my heart, was mayors that you would least expect to be putting up their hand and say, well, let's spend some of our local ratepayer dollars on this.
Yeah.
Were those rural councils. I had strong support like Mayor Mark Jamieson on the Sunshine Coast and Mayor Williams out in the Redlands. But it was the Somersets, the Lockyer Valleys, the Scenic Rims, the Toowoomba's. They were the ones that really sort of came to the fore. They took the biggest risk of all in putting up their hand and saying, we're going to put some ratepayer money into this. And so we did all of that. That took about 2 years. And then, of course, having done your pre-feasibility, and they say, there's certain issues, and they were, you need some more housing and you need a better, transport and public road system.
Yeah.
But then you've got to do a full feasibility study at that point.
And the transport system is the light bulb moment as well, isn't it? Because a lot of what was driving this from the perspective of the Council of Mayors was, yes, the Olympics, but actually a different opportunity as well, which was the 45-minute region. I think it was.
Yeah,
you
that's
called
absolutely right. Good memory, Chris. Good memory.
What do you mean, like 45 minutes from?
From the Sunshine Coast to Brisbane,
Okay.
Brisbane Gold Coast,
Yep.
and ultimately west to Toowoomba.
Okay.
It was about a vision for a 45-minute region where, lifestyle, people's movement in terms of the jobs and the economy. So it was, and as I said at the outset, this whole notion of doing an Olympics wasn't for the fact that we all loved sport. It was for the fact that this would drive infrastructure and an international recognition of Brisbane region, and then investment attraction would fall from that.
I rattle on this podcast a lot about my travels in December to the World Expo in Dubai, which I spent a week just having been a child at World Expo 88 here in Brisbane. I wanted to go and see it and had the most fascinating week of my life just seeing where the world's travelling in different areas. And the buzzword, the keyword, if you like, and the biggest pavilion at World Expo Dubai was the mobility pavilion, which essentially is not just transport, but more, as you said there, about lifestyle and how we travel, how we communicate as a community, and how we get around, how do we connect communities through mobility. And that's in almost every national pavilion at World Expo you went to, mobility was the key word. Now, what's the future? How are we going to get around in a general sense over the next 10, 20, 30 years? So it's an interesting point. And that's about livability in a city, isn't it? Or in a region, quality of life, those key sort of entities that override everything else we talk about here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so much of the time of travel governs lifestyle feel.
Which makes Brisbane a great place. The fact that, unlike Sydney, the average commute back and forth every day would probably be around 3 hours.
But that's the point too, is without the the catalyst of the Olympics to unlock some of this infrastructure. And we've seen even in the past week, there's money in the budget, even though it's not for the next 4 years, there's money in the federal budget for the Sunshine Coast Rail line, which is only happening because of the Olympics. So there's all these things that otherwise would have got caught in the endless conversation between state, federal and local governments that are actually now going to happen because of the Olympics.
Correct. Exactly. So the pathway is there in terms of the infrastructure build. And so and how we sort of came to work out, well, what is it we actually need was one of our visits as a group of mayors to Canberra, which we did every year to knock on the door and make sure that they knew what we were wanting as a region, was I had a meeting with Minister Paul Fletcher, who was a responsible minister at the time, and he went 50-50 with the Council of Mayors from a funding point of view to do what was called a mass movement study, people mass movement study. So it was what you were talking about earlier, Lutzi.
It's PMM.
A PMM, absolutely, for sure. But it's just about that mobility thing. Yeah. How do you make it happen? Yeah. And so that then, when we brought down the feasibility study, we also, a month earlier, had brought down the people mass movement study. So it all gelled together.
And do you think in your heart of hearts, I mean, I think that the 2000 Olympics, when people try and draw comparisons, I don't think there's honestly very many comparisons we can draw between where Sydney was as a city in the lead up to during the Olympics and post-Olympics and where Brisbane is. I think that we're so much better placed as a city and a city that's still very much on the move and growing as opposed to Sydney, which I think is kind of flatlined as far as it can develop or grow. Yeah. Do you agree with that? Or?
Absolutely. There's no doubt that the world is our oyster. We've got so much untapped potential. And so I think the other thing is that, you know, whilst we've always talked about southeast Queensland as what we call the Brisbane region as a bid, there is so much in it for everywhere else. So after I left the Mayoralty, the Council of Mayors entrusted me to go and talk to every mayor in the state because, you know, whether you're a mayor out at Longreach or you're Cairns or wherever you are, you know, the question is, well, you know, does this mean Southeast Queensland's getting all the goodies in this? Yeah. And there's a sort of sense of them and us, and we didn't want that happening, and it didn't need to happen. So as we travelled, I talked to some of the mayors about things that had happened in the Sydney Olympics. Yep. So this is a good reminder. In year 2000, a business in Townsville got a $400 million contract for the Sydney Olympics and doing prefabrication works for the Games Village. Yeah, right. So everyone had sort of forgotten that. There was $50 million in benefit to 2 or 3 provincial towns around Bundaberg, Maryborough, etc., for teams that were doing their pre-training for Sydney. So I'm saying to them, so if this was happening when the games were in Sydney, how much bigger is it going to be when they're in southeast Queensland?
And this was actually another part of the story, is that the southeast Queensland mayors were pushing it, but at this point the state government still wasn't convinced. Certainly within cabinet, there was not a majority in cabinet at this point of the merits of a Brisbane bid, because they were worried about the impact that might have on the politics outside of Southeast Queensland, where the regions see, well, this is just another thing for Brisbane. Where's our gold-plated Bruce Highway?
It comes down to appetite for risk. And, I mean, one of the things when I was Lord Mayor was I always had an appetite for risk. Calculated, but an appetite. And if you don't do that, then you really don't achieve the advancements that you potentially can do. And so, there was never, in my view, a risk around this. People just needed to understand, to look beyond what I called it the Beyond the Medals tour. Because, I was completely upfront to say to people, you're not going to get gold medals in this place. There's not going to be anything happening out at Longreach. But Longreach, what are you going to do to sell the Outback experience to all the eyes of the world that are going to be on the Brisbane region? How are you going to find your space in this opportunity that will never be repeated?
Yeah, and in a tourism space, like when you think of the great cities of the world or the great regions of the world, for me, it's like you jump off a plane. You've just been on the plane for however, God knows how many hours, and you get off.
Lutzy flies Wanker Air.
Yeah, I fly Wanker Air all the time. So like business class, obviously. So I've slept 12 hours solid, Graham. So it's not as much of an impact for me. But what I'm saying is, you get off that plane, and the great cities or the great places in the world, it's just from that point where you grab your luggage. It's easy you've got options of how you get to your accommodation, okay, and then you've got, once you get to the accommodation, how do I get to that next level of separation?
The nearest rooftop bar.
For me, the nearest rooftop bar, but it might be the nearest, Longreach, for instance. How do I get there? It's not. You can't be 3 buses, a train ride, and an Uber these days. You've got to create a structure around how we sell this as a magnificent region that's accessible.
Absolutely.
And mobile enough to be able to reach. So it's all these, and we
and that's legacy.
Yeah, and that's where the legacy
that's
comes
more
into
than
it.
the 4 weeks of sport.
Yeah. And we haven't even mentioned the sport here, but the sport's, in my mind, is the easy bit. What we did prove in 2000 is that we can run a great games in a sporting sense, and we've said before that after 2000 we've become the leaders in sports administration and sports presentation and all these things right to this very point. In Paris in whatever it is, 2 years, there'll be mostly Australians running the ship, as there probably will be, even though the Americans might be a little more stubborn in who's running the show, but there'll still be the leaders of industry have been Australians since then in all those areas that make a great sporting event.
Yeah, we do sports standing on our ears, Lutzy.
We can do it, right?
Absolutely. That's the easy bit.
Yeah.
We are well versed in doing sports,
Yes.
an event management.
Yes.
So the trick for this is, got that name up in lights. And, I often make this analogy. This is one that often gets lost on people. Here in Queensland, we're all, Queenslander, but when you go around to any airport in the world, you don't see the name Queensland up there. I challenge people, what is the prefecture of Tokyo? What is the province of Chengdu?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? People know cities.
Yep.
They don't know
Yep.
states.
Yeah.
So that BNE is going to be up around the world, and that's what we have to trade on. That's got to be the entry point. And the other mayors in South East Queensland got that. They knew that Somerset or Lockyer Valley or Scenic Rim were never going to be household names around the world, but if they can tag in as part of Brisbane region, then they've got something going for them.
Yep.
Yeah, it's prescient of them too, because they understand they're not going to get Olympic sports as part of it either. But it's
Big
rising
picture of
tide
that.
floats all boats.
We'll have a quick break, come back and wrap things up in just a moment. Tour the Games, Brisbane 2032. It's been great to have former Lord Mayor Graham Quirk with us in the studio today.
Okay, what was the moment that Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk got on board?
I don't know when the light bulb moment happened in that regard, but what was going on was the numbers just continued to improve in terms of the numbers of people that wanted this to happen. We were in a very lucky position, Chris and Lutzy, where we started with 56% support. Tokyo, by way of their support, they started about 41%. But the numbers just continue to grow. Millenniums, young people, they were sort of up around the 65% pretty early on. They were always 10% above the average. But those numbers grew to 65% rapidly. And it reached the point where, well, how do you say no to this?
Yep.
It would have been, it was at a point where it had a momentum. And I can never be thankful enough for the Courier Mail getting behind this, because we were battling out there as mayors. We knew that we really were onto something here. The Olympic movement internationally, you could see that there were things going on there where it was starting to head in the right direction. But this is something where you need governments and oppositions at every level to be on board with. Otherwise, the international Olympic movement just are not interested. So I think it became a question of there's no way out of this in the end. That's my honest view of it. Because there was, for a long time, a fairly lonely journey involved with this. There was a lot of people that thought when we started this we were mad. Never happened. Just the mayors kidding themselves. But it was the fact that we just kept going, the fact that popularity continued to build, and then some great pressure from the Courier Mail around this can really be something for Queensland.
I'll second that as well, because whatever people say about newspapers, and particularly in being a one newspaper town or city as well, which effectively we are, the newspaper still very much drives what the news that we cover in radio, and same in television. I think it's critical. Once the Courier Mail got on board, it drives how people start to perceive, or at least have opinions on things about. Yeah. And I think on that note, it's incredible. It's incredibly important that sooner rather than later we explain to the people of Brisbane how invested they are in these games and how they can become a very important part of these games. The Brisbane people.
Absolutely, Lutzy. Absolutely.
In real ways as well, like real ways that they can impact how these games are going to look, how it's going, how they're going to, and the legacy they leave, and that needs to happen sort of now.
It does. And along the journey, I have to say too that Scott Smith, I should give him mention, because he was ferreting away in the background.
As he is today.
With the bureaucracy. Well, absolutely. But
literally.
He's always
his phone ferreting away. His ears pricked up then, though, didn't they? Oh, hello.
But just making sure that the bureaucracy knew everything that was going on, and within the departments, behind the political scene, there was also this understanding of what it's about, and that certainly helped enormously.
It was certainly interesting watching it, how it became a snowball, really, didn't it? Where it was small at the start, and then everyone gets on board, and before long, you can't stop it. It almost, and then we got to the point where the current Lord Mayor and the Premier went over to Tokyo last year, and they said they were nervous, but it was essentially locked and loaded. There was, there was no. That's actually, while it's still a surprise now, almost 12 months on, it almost wasn't a surprise by that point. We'd reached that stage where
they were nervous, because if they lost it at that point, it was their fault.
Yeah,
they did something to stuff it up in Tokyo. What did you do? That was why they were nervous. But they got there. Yeah.
It's like a team sport. You got to build momentum. That's what was happening.
Now, okay, so you're a passionate Brisbane person.
Yes,
what is the thing? Putting aside all of the pre-feasibility studies and the feasibility studies and the sand crab lasagnas at Il Centro with John Coates, what is, when you think forward to that 10 years from now, 3,800 days or so, what is the thing or the things that you are going to be sitting there thinking, wow, this is why I'm most proud of this work that I was able to do when I was Lord Mayor?
Well, I think the infrastructure that's left behind, it's for me, it's always about lifestyle. We're here to make people's lives as good as it can be. And if we can get that, create the investment for the jobs of the future, for a next generation of kids, then that's the satisfying bit from my point of view. And then a great Olympic and Paralympic Games, obviously, as a spectacle, where Brisbane region comes out of this with a new sense of respectability around the world. I think when you put it in this perspective, we've had London, Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Paris, Los Angeles, Brisbane. Those other
Tokyo.
and
Oh, and
Tokyo,
Tokyo in the
of
middle,
course.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Those other named cities are already, they're already household names around the world.
Yep.
We're
That's
not.
why it feels
We're
surreal,
not.
doesn't it?
Absolutely, and that is.
I hope we don't
why-
become the Helsinki of the Olympics for this century.
No, I think we'll become the Barcelona.
Yes,
Because
yes.
they created a great opportunity for themselves, and I think now is our turn on the sun.
That's the only one I think we can really draw comparisons with. I think is Barcelona. And again, do you the Brisbane you see in 20 years from now? Do you see it being a magnificent place to live, and secondly, do you think the Olympics will play an important role in creating that, or at least being a catalyst towards that?
Yeah, absolutely, it will, and the legacy will depend upon how much we plan for it. So these things don't happen by themselves. We've got to make sure that everybody, and that's why I was using that Longreach reference earlier, everyone's got to think about how can I maximise advantage to create a legacy for our place.
Well, I hope you're right, because we're incredibly proud people, aren't we? Parochial people. So, but sometimes I think it's almost an event like the Olympics people from outside can remind us how special where we are and what we have is, and I think that's where the Olympics will help as well.
We're still a well-kept secret in many ways.
We are indeed.
Now, if the Olympics was this Saturday evening,
I'm busy.
who would you, other than Lutzi, who would you like to see light that flame?
Oh yes, yes. We need to ask everyone this because we can put this together at some
Didn't she
point.
just leave the room?
Oh,
Susan O'Neill, who just asked never gave my car keys back. by
I
the
should
way.
say your car.
I think she stole my car.
She must like your car. That's it.
Well, she
That's what you can do.
She
If
plays
you're
the
Susie
cards.
O'Neill, you can just say, "Can I have your car?" Done.
She plays her cards very close to her chest. We didn't know she was participating in the 2018 Commonwealth Games opening ceremony literally until we were sitting in the stands.
We could send her up there with a cigarette lighter. I reckon that'll look really good.
She's anti-smoking. She won't do it, but maybe a sparkler. But yeah, Susie. I mean, do you think someone like that? I mean, some of that ilk, or someone's a young athlete? Like not that.
Well,
not that
I
Susie's
think
not young.
the thing is, it's 10 years away, and there's going to be plenty of new stars on the horizon over that time as well. Who knows what will happen? But
We love your creative, so if you have any ideas between now, this needs to be a fluid space. We need you involved in this podcast on an ongoing fashion, as I was saying, when time allows.
you've got about 120 shows to decide this.
Is that right? Have you done the math on that? Seems like a hell of a lot more than that. Is it 120? Oh, it's got to be more than that, hasn't it?
Halfway there. Look, I think you talked about this. The young athletes coming through, and Lutzi, you said before I wrote it down actually that the sport is the easy bit.
Yeah.
I've got some exciting news, which is that we've locked in the boss of the Queensland Academy of Sport, Chelsea Waugh, for this podcast. Not next time, but the time after. Now, she was the one, as we've spoken about before here, who led the search. The Team GB search that led for young athletes that led to their great success in London and then on to Rio. And what she's doing out there at the QAS, I went out and had a look the other day, Lutzi.
Did you have a look?
It's I guarantee you that sport is not the easy bit. The plans that are in place
Yes.
to make sure that we have a runway that allow and a talent search program that's going to make sure that in 2032 we have the sort of success on the sporting fields that we remember from Sydney 2000 is quite extraordinary. So I can't wait for that conversation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we were talking about the presentation of the games, but there's incredible pressure on performance at a home Olympics, and we need to make sure we get that right. But I think Chelsea Waugh in particular, with what the QAS are doing, just from a Queensland perspective, off the back of what happened in London, is we are on the right track in that way. And I mean, Queensland has been the breeding ground of champion athletes, like up until literally Ash Barty, a little girl from Ipswich who was a world beater. And we continue to defy the odds in a sporting sense, Queensland. We just keep doing it, which is getting goosebumps thinking about it. Like, it's incredible, isn't it? That we're part of that. These are our peers.
Yeah.
And I'm also getting goosebumps about the last 5 appointments to the BOCOG, which we'll be able to talk about next time. Surely, Lutzi.
Well,
I feel like we say this every month, but we're getting very, very close
to a meeting. To a meeting happening.
The Avengers, the 5 Avengers.
The 5 Avengers. We promise that in the next month we will have those names. Graham, an absolute pleasure to have you in. We wish you all the best in your future endeavours, and if you could and if time permits, we'd love you to keep a dialogue open with us on the podcast, because we respect the role that you've played in this juggernaut as the greatest show on earth comes to our part of the world.
Good on you, Lutzy. Thanks very much. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris, again. Subscribe Toward the Games on Instagram. Get involved. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll catch you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Lassie.
Ciao for now.